Hello and welcome to The Actor and the Engineer. My name is Paul James. I am the actor.
My name is Josh Knapp. I'm the broadcast engineer, and I'm also interested in what you're about to say next.
Well, for people who don't know, I actually asked Josh if we could have the podcast recording an hour later than we normally do it for a couple of reasons. The first reason is my father, I helped take care of my father, and he needed some stuff done at a specific time tonight. But the real reason was because I was coming from my second rehearsal for the new play I was just cast in.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. Yes, we had our first rehearsal last night. We had auditions last Tuesday, callbacks on Saturday, and I found out Saturday afternoon that I got the part. And it's a really great play, and it's a really great part. And I'm just like excited because of the obvious reasons, but I'm excited about this part and I'm excited about this play. But I'm excited because when you get done doing a play, you don't think you're going to do another one. You just don't think it's going to happen again. And it's happened again. So I'm thrilled. And I'm literally running into the door 5 minutes before we're supposed to record the podcast. So I am amped up and ready to go and ready to talk about this new movie. But yeah, I got another part in a play.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, it's a good play too. On stage the whole entire time.
Wow.
There are 3 main characters. Yeah, 2 female characters, older, younger, and me.
Wow.
And I have not been this excited about a play in a long time. It's not that I wasn't excited about the other plays. It's just that it was new to me after about 15 years. So my disposition needed to be adjusted. And then I got really thrown into it, and I got this really major epic part in Raleigh and then another really good part here. And now it's like, why not? Why not do this? So, yeah.
Yeah, and it seems like just in your recent theater career over the last few years that I've known you, it's kind of like ramped up to, over the different plays you've done, it's kind of ramped up to this point where, you're in a position where, obviously you feel like you can be in that situation and you're confident to take on this role. And I think that's really cool. I mean, just in seeing the plays that I saw when you were here in Raleigh and then hearing about the play that you did up there in Virginia and this one, it seems like a logical progression of roles for you. So I think that's really great. And I'm excited for you.
Thank you. This little frame of mind switched when I was driving to the actual audition. Instead of, why am I doing this? Just stop. Yeah, anxiety, nervousness. I thought, why not? Why not me?
Mm-hmm.
Why not? And I just went in there with that professional disposition, and I thought, why not? And the first thing that the director said was, I need for you to be as angry as you possibly can be. I need you to blow the roof off. I was like, I'm in. I'm good. And I think I scared some people.
Whoa.
Yeah, maybe a little.
Dang.
Yeah, it's pretty intense. Same theater company, the Generic Theater.
Mm-hmm.
It was great to see a lot of those people again. And, you're never sure how you're coming across to people just in general in life. And in theater, it's a very particular mindset sometimes. And I can be very animated and over the top and moody, which I need to mention at this point that if I sound like a moody little puss from our Vice episode, I apologize to everybody involved in that movie. I re-listened to some of our podcast, and I sound like a know-it-all, miserable puss. I don't know what was wrong with me with that podcast. I sound miserable, and we don't like to come from that frame of mind. We like to start with the positive and find positive. Every moment you mentioned something that you liked about the film, I counteract it with something in that podcast. So I apologize to Adam McKay and Christian Bale. I need to revisit that film. Maybe it was a mood I was in when I saw the film, but I am a moody little puss in that podcast, so I apologize. I will not be tonight because life is really good right now. Another thing that I realized this time, and I think I've realized it the past few times too, is that you're in the room with people who are discovering moments of truth from fiction. And it's a beautiful thing when they tap into something that you never saw, never heard. And there was a reading between 2 ladies at this audition that was just beautiful. It was mesmerizing. And I felt like I was privileged to be in that room to see that happen. It's like when you go see a great piece of theater and those moments just hit you. I got to see that in a cold reading between two actresses who never met. Nobody really knows the script, and they're just sort of, for lack of a better term, winging it. And they tapped into something. I was like, am I going to start crying in the middle of this audition? I was like, this is going to be a little embarrassing, but it was beautiful. And I was privileged to see that. And as I was driving away, the one thought that I always have is I didn't embarrass myself. And I'm always happy that, I didn't embarrass myself. And if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, that's cool. But I got to witness those moments, and that's the value in it, the process and watching that. Yeah, sure, I wanted a part, obviously, because I checked my email like 30,000 times until they gave me the call. I was like, I must really want this. I kept shutting down Ozark, which I have an obsession right now with, and I was binge watching, and I kept shutting it down to pull up my email to see if they sent me a yes or no letter. Actually, I turned my phone off to charge it, and I thought, oh, well, maybe they called. And so I turned my phone back on, and there was a voicemail. And I was like, oh, dum, dum, dum. And sure enough, it was the director calling, and she was offering me the part. But the point to that is that those moments are mesmerizing to me. I could live in that moment watching those two actresses discover something new. And to actually be in that room is a beautiful thing. It is really magical. So I feel blessed on so many different levels. I feel fortunate on so many different levels, but to not get the part would have been disappointing, of course, because obviously I wanted it much more than I thought I did or realized I did. But to actually, if I hadn't got that part and then I could think back on the process and to have been in the room would have been fulfilling for me. But it's double plus good for me because I was in the room, I was fulfilled, and I got the part. So I'm hyped up, dude. So you might have to contain me tonight.
Well, maybe you can use some of that energy to talk about this movie we're talking about tonight. It's Spike Lee's new movie, BlacKkKlansman. So, I saw this in the theater. Steph and I went to the theater and saw this a while ago, and I just rewatched it. And then you saw it recently, correct?
2 nights ago.
Oh, okay, great. So yeah,
for the first time,
it's gonna be fresh in your mind. Yeah. So this movie is about it's based on a true story of an African American police officer in Colorado Springs who was on a undercover type situation, and they actually infiltrated the Ku Klux Klan, him on the phone with people from the Ku Klux Klan locally, and ultimately David Duke, and then also white counterpart who was representing his character, his person, in the meetups with the Klan. So it's crazy that this is based on actual events. It's an amazing story. I think it seems like it's a cool idea for a movie, but it's just kind of amazing that it really happened. So it stars John David Washington, who I promise, did not realize that he was Denzel Washington's son. Like it didn't cross my mind. So I don't know. That's pretty cool.
I've been watching him on the HBO show Ballers.
That's where I saw him first.
Dwayne Johnson.
Yeah,
yes. And I was like, who is this guy? This guy is good. And it wasn't until recently that somebody said, oh, that's Denzel Washington's son. And I was like, wait, what? I was like, first of all, what a daunting thing to wake up one day and say, I'm going to be an actor. Dad, Denzel, Academy Award winning multiple time actor. I'm going to be an actor. And now I can't not hear Denzel's voice in his voice. It's a little less prominent on the show Ballers, which I like a lot, by the way. I think Dwayne Johnson is turned into a really, really interesting actor. And I think we've talked about him before in that respect. But there is something about truth in performances that I'm attracted to, and there's truth behind what he does. So he has no reason to worry about walking in his father's shoes. He's got something all on his own. And going into this movie knowing who his father was, I couldn't get his voice out of my head, because if you turn away from the screen, you can hear Denzel Washington's voice. There's inflections and tones that are just there. That's a genetic thing. There's nothing he can do about that. But, you know, he has truth behind what he does. So,
Well, and it seems like because he was a good football player, he ended up getting drafted by the St. Louis Rams, but then was released, and then he played in Europe for a while, and I think he pretty much like finished his football career in like 2012. So I don't even think he really thought about acting until after his football career was over. But yeah, I mean he's only been in a few movies within the last few years. But I mean, like the choices that he's made are pretty good. Like we said, we saw him in Ballers, and then he was also the other movie he was in this year, which I haven't seen, is Monsters and Men, which is another kind of like racially charged, and also the relationship between the police and the black community. So that right there is something that he also plays a cop in that one, I believe. So yeah, he's also in the David Lowery movie, The Old Man and the Gun, which I still
yeah,
haven't
I just
seen.
saw that on his bio.
Oh yeah, I mean I want to see that because that's supposedly Robert Redford's last movie. We'll see if that's true, but yeah, that looks really interesting. So yeah, I thought that was that's great casting because of his capabilities as an actor, not specifically because his dad's Denzel Washington. I mean, obviously I'm sure he was, well, in fact, it looks like he was like a bit part as a kid in Malcolm X. So I mean, there's your Denzel Washington Spike Lee connection right there. So that's great. There's a lot of great actors in this movie. Some of the parts that they have in there, even for like single scenes. The first, I don't know if he's like a city councilman or what, but it's played by Isaiah Whitlock Jr., who I saw in The Wire, and he's kind of known for saying she, like he doesn't actually, well, sometimes he cusses, but in this one he cuts off, like the police officer like cuts him off, and like so that's I guess his like signature phrase or whatever in some shows and movies and stuff. So seeing him, I was like, oh, I know him, and then seeing him give his signature line reading, I was like, okay, that's a pretty cool little in joke there. So yeah, but before that, before any scenes with real people in the present time of this movie, which is set in the late '60s, is we get a scene from Gone with the Wind. So I think that is supposed to bring up kind of like it's supposed to start the discussion between the filmmaker and the film goer about film, about movies, and about how they portray race and how they portray the relationship between races and our history as a country. So we get Gone with the Wind at the very beginning, which is kind of like after the burning of Atlanta, and the big kind of like Sherman goes through, and then Scarlett O'Hara walks through a bunch of bodies, and then it actually dollies out to show the Confederate flag still flying, as a like a we're still here, type of a thing. So that's the framing of how that portion of our history is shown in that movie, in Gone with the Wind. So movies will I was kind of amazed at how much of a plot, how much of an element in this film other movies are, whether it's blaxploitation movies or Birth of a Nation comes in, later on in the movie, and is brought up. So, yeah, I mean, those are big deals that I think that Spike Lee understands the importance of those movies at the times when they came out and how they were received, and he's bringing up, I think, questions of how they were received by the main public, and then also what that might have done to the black community at the time they came out, which must have been kind of interesting. Like Hattie McDaniel winning an Academy Award for her role in Gone with the Wind. I mean, I don't know, it's interesting. So lots of discussions are started right off the bat. So I thought that was interesting. And then we get kind of like a little icebreaker of Alec Baldwin, which I thought was funny. He really he really makes those line readings funny, and it goes over the top. And I think it's a good thing to have in this movie, which it walks the line between serious and funny. And I think that it tips into absurdities, and that's what makes the comedy good in this one. And I don't really have a problem with tone in this one. Like I've brought that up about like, I don't know, Aquaman recently. That the tone was just was off for me. But I think in this one, the tone is right on.
Well, I have to confess that I'm a big fan of Spike Lee. I don't know if I can be objective about his films because I understand what I'm supposed to be taking from the film when I'm watching it. At least I feel like I do. And I go all the way back to Crooklyn and She's Gotta Have It and School Days. I think I've seen all of his movies. I think there's one recently that I might have missed, but so I'm a big fan. So when I go into a movie of his, it's hard to sit back and say, was this good, bad, or indifferent? Because I'm already set up to like something because I understand his style. At least it speaks to me in a way that I feel like I understand his style. And, I've seen most of his movies in the theater, with the exception of this one. I saw this one on Redbox. I just didn't have time to get out to the theater to see it at the time when it was out. I think it's still out, but I saw Crooklyn in the theater. I saw 25th Hour in the theater, which I love that movie. And if you've never seen that movie, it's a really good one with Edward Norton. It's just really well told. And he's always interjected pop culture, films, music of all different genres and all different types. Springsteen's song ends the 25th Hour. So, and a really good Springsteen song that has something to do with the backdrop of that film being about the two towers that fell. And I love that Edward Norton's apartment overlooks, I think it's Edward Norton's apartment that overlooks the two towers that fell and in New York, in Tribeca, and they're reconstructing those two towers. And that's actually the opening scene of the movie, one of the opening scenes of that movie. And I'm just transfixed by how he can say so much with what he puts behind the actors and what he puts in the scene that is not necessarily the actors or the dialogue or the main object of the scene, but he colors things in such a way and he puts so much texture behind everything that everything is purposeful and everything has a meaning. So I had high hopes for this film. And in 2 seconds, I knew this is an important movie because going back to the opening sequence with Gone with the Wind, what I took from that is that these popular films of our time, meaning that time when that film came out, 1939, dictates what people think. And that film, in my opinion, glorifies the Civil War in a way that is probably not completely a representation of what the truth is. And that you're right. When you see the rebel flag, we're here, we're still here. And that is the last image of that film. And that ingrains into people's beings and their consciousness and their subconsciousness. And even though they lost the Civil War, people really think they still should celebrate the Civil War. And, we've had the whole rebel flag issues in the past couple of years, and history versus culture versus dynasties versus rationalizations for racism. I mean, it represents so many things for so many people that for a movie to end with that image and glorify that image, for me, it's glorifying an image that it shouldn't glorify, is a statement Spike Lee immediately makes off the bat. Like, hey, you have to be careful of the influences in your life because they have an effect on who you are and generations to come, and the way people think and the way that people treat other people are all based on these things that have been threaded through our consciousness our whole entire existence. And the fact that he has a character in a movie mentioning Hattie McDaniel as a reason why we should not like black people, because look, she won the Oscar for playing Mammy. And the way he tones it and the way he says, he basically is saying that's all they're good for. And, why would she win the Oscar if she was more than just that, He completely misses the fact that she's the first and only African-American woman to win the Oscar at that point, and for another, I think, 50 years or something, or 1989, Whoopi Goldberg won for Ghost. So however long that is. He completely misses that point and uses it as a rationalization for fear and fear-mongering and a reason to be discriminatory against people, because why else would she have won the Oscar if she wasn't born to be that? So I thought that was an interesting perspective. I never thought about that before. I find it interesting that people who fall on that side of this discussion use the things that we see as badges of honor as reasons to be hateful and prejudiced and discriminatory. I have never seen that represented before. So there's something about the language that Spike Lee has and sets up as a filmmaker that I feel I understand. Now, I might not fully understand being a Caucasian male in the year 2018, 2019. I might not fully understand, but I never feel like Spike Lee doesn't set something up for me to understand it if I want to explore it. And this film is riddled with those things in such a great way. I mean, I don't know much about this subject matter, meaning this actual story. So for him to pepper in things that I know from my upbringing and I know from 60s films and Pam Grier, and for him to show people those things also makes it comforting for a person who doesn't know a lot about this subject to sort of go, okay, I understand what that is, and I remember that. What is he trying to say with that? And it allows you to educate yourself as you're going through the film. At least it does for me. And his films have always done that. And he has just received a DGA nomination. He's probably going to get his first Academy Award nomination as director, and he's going to deserve absolutely both of them, because this film, it doesn't have as many stylistic choices as those other films in his canon. But dude, I don't want to jump to the ending of the film, but what he does at the end of the film, I literally started clapping like a little kid. Yay! Because it's his style that he's had in all of his films that I was like, is he going to do that? And where is it appropriate for him to do that?
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and the fact that he merges the two together with the Pam Grier type style film and his thing, I was like, that is not only brilliant because he took it one step further than what he normally does, but he utilized it in such the right place. He sort of did an homage to himself, but he did it in the right place. And in my opinion, everything is in the right place in this film. From performances to style, he kind of stands back. He doesn't have as much of a thumbprint on this film stylistically. He does that thing when the speaker who played Dr. Dre in Straight Outta Compton, I can't remember.
Corey Hawkins?
Yes, thank you. When he's doing that speech to the black student campus or society.
Kwame Ture is who he's playing.
Yes, thank you. And then you see kind of the heads kind of floating around of people in the audience, and it's not a straight shot of the head. It's like it's cropped out of the actual film and then put back onto the film.
Yeah, it's like keyed out.
Yeah, it's so good. It just makes you go, it's not a reaction shot from a crowd. It's a specific reaction from that character in the film. And that character just happens to be an extra.
Yeah.
But you learn so much by those people's expressions and what they were thinking and feeling during that speech. You're like, but it's not heavy-handed on any level. I loved this movie.
Well, for me, like, man, I hate to start with that exact scene, but I thought that the Corey Hawkins, as Kwame Ture speech, I thought it was good. In the beginning of that speech, is he's talking about like redefining beauty for Black people, because he's saying like you are looking to white people to define what what is beautiful, comparing, the sizes of noses and the types of hair, whether it's, like crinkle, I think he says like crinkly, trying to straighten it out, something like that. And he's saying like, you are beautiful, like in saying that like you need to understand that this is something to be celebrated. Your heritage is something to be celebrated, and your, how you look is something to be celebrated. And I think that's, for me, that's what I got out of when he gets to the end of the speech and he's kind of like, finishing it up, and he talks about Tarzan, and he talks about, all of these, like he kind of takes that and explains, his relationship with Tarzan and all this stuff. But then as he's moving forward in his speech, then we start getting the floating heads. And I think that's supposed to just say like, like we're going to put these people on screen, really big, 60 feet tall. And these people are beautiful, and it may also be that like, how many times have this many people have this many examples of blackness been on screen, this large, even recently. I don't know, but it's during that speech. So that's what I got during that. The floating heads thing, I didn't feel that though. Like I didn't, to me, like maybe that's my weird engineering brain. I was like, it didn't fit in. Like maybe I'm not, I don't know, artistic enough to even think about that. Usually I can be like, man, what would be a good idea is to do this, but I would have never thought to do that. Now maybe that's an homage to something that he's seen in the past, or maybe that's just like his artistic way of displaying these people. But because he's kind of like, he's zooming in and out on each person, they are kind of like floating heads. It didn't seem as grounded to me. Like it seemed more ethereal, and I felt like what the speaker was talking about was more kind of like grounded, So it seemed like a kind of a discontinuity for me emotionally. So I just, and in talking through it, I think I feel a little bit more solidified in my opinion of that particular, of how he shot that particular scene. I mean, I think that the subject, the content matter was good and purposeful in that at that point in the film, but the way that he decided to show it, I don't know, it took me out of it a little bit. So, but and then, he ends all that up with, all power to all the people, as opposed to, because I think they even started it off. Did they start it off with Black Power, like chanting Black Power? But at the end, he was chanting, he was leading them in a chant, all power to all the people. So, which is brought up multiple times throughout the movie.
And I totally see where you're coming from. And I can understand exactly what you're saying, that it could pull you out. And it is a stylistic choice that kind of comes out of nowhere. But I guess because that's why I started the show with saying I can't really be objective. I'm expecting those things from a Spike Lee movie. And the fact that there aren't a whole lot of those things in the film really thrilled me at the end, because he's making different choices. He's not relying on a gimmick, for lack of a better term. But for me, it goes back to bold choices always will work for me. Fortune favors the bold. And I think it's a combination of everything that you said that we don't normally see. Those type of black people on film, if you will, with the big 70s afros, which are great, by the way. I love that.
The dance scene was awesome too. Like seeing that dance, everybody had afros. I love that. Huge, like the guys had the crazy beards.
I was in love with Soul Train when I was a kid. Yeah, I loved it. And I love that some are red and some are blonde. I was in love with Soul Train and American Bandstand when I was a kid. Started with American Bandstand, but my brother's like, hey, watch this show. And so we watched Soul Train every Saturday afternoon, and I was obsessed with it. And I even carried a pick around, and I even tried to make my hair into an afro. And finally, one of my friend's parents, who happened to be black, they were like, yeah, that's not kind of going to work for you. It's not how it works. And I was like, hey man, don't break the delusion. And I look back on it, I looked like Fozzie Bear on crack, and it was really wrong, but I was infatuated with platform shoes and bell bottoms and corduroys and 70s and black light posters. And I wanted the African American woman who was half naked with her big afro on the black light poster in my room, and my parents were like, yeah, we're white and Catholic. No, but I wanted it so bad. And I would carry a pick, and I just thought I was cool, and I didn't really care in the long run. I mean, other than pictures and looking back, I still thought I looked cool. So I don't care. So to actually see those people represented as just a norm is a great thing to begin with. And to see extras represented how they're thinking and processing this speech is unusual. So that's bold. I understand what you're saying, but for me, there's just something about making a choice that nobody else would make that makes it work for me. I don't know if that explains it, and I certainly understand it's probably not going to change your opinion about it. And I understand you're saying it pulls you out of it, but actually those kind of things excite me so much that I want to know more after it happens. Like, I wonder about those people now. Like, what was that guy's name? What was that girl's name? And, oh, that beard he had. What does he do? Is he, still going to school? What did he do? It excites me in a way that whether or not it works for the narrative falls to the wayside, because I have spent so much time in my brain for the 3 seconds that it happens on film trying to figure it out that it's exciting to me. So I understand where you're coming from, but for me, those choices work. And the fact that he doesn't do a whole lot of them is also exciting, because I expected that from the beginning. And I thought, well, maybe he's going to do that thing throughout the film, what he does with Alec Baldwin in the beginning. And he has this kind of speech that he's rehearsed, and he keeps forgetting the line. And as an actor, that's kind of what you go through. Like, that's not the line. What's the line? So it was interesting, and it's all being filmed in front of an actual projector, which is projecting stuff on the Alec Baldwin. I thought, well, okay, well, maybe this is the style that I have to get used to for this Spike Lee film. But it wasn't, and that to me is great, because he kind of doesn't do that for the rest of the film. He makes a few really Spike Lee stylistic choices, but most of it is just a straightforward telling of this narrative. To me, for him, that's thrilling. Did I mention I love this movie?
Well, and I think the Alec Baldwin thing at the beginning, I think that might be like a kind of a grotesquerie, like he's got all these different images being, sprayed on his face, and it's kind of, maybe it's meant to distort his face. And I know that the things that are playing in the background are like the Brown versus Board of Education, like the kids getting bussed in, and he talks about that a little bit. But it's also not lost on me that he got Alec Baldwin to play this role, who happens to portray Donald Trump on Saturday Night Live all the time. So I think there can be a connection made there too. I was like, well, I wonder why they got Alec Baldwin to do this, and I was like, okay, I can see a reason for that, to kind of like backdoor that in, or subliminally get that into viewers' minds. I can see them like that.
I never even thought of that until you just mentioned it. But if you're thinking about it, if that's a backdoor way, or that's a subliminal message, if you will, it's bold at the end of the film what he does. He puts it right in your face.
Oh, yeah.
This is who I've been talking about most of this film. That's brilliant.
There's bookends to this movie. We'll talk about those. And I think it's well formed. The structure of the movie is well formed. But I was amazed. I did some reading on this movie, and it's pretty much like on the real story, and it's pretty much like straight up like it's true. Like most of the stuff that happens is true, as far as like him calling up the Ku Klux Klan, the local chapter of the Ku Klux Klan, from a newspaper entry, him using his real name, kind of, I guess, not thinking much about using his real name, but accidentally, or whatever you want to call it, using his real name. All of those things are all true. So that's kind of amazing. And then the character that is played by Adam Driver, I don't know, that might not be the real person or whatever, but yeah, I think that whole relationship between them, and just Adam Driver is good. And that's like an understatement, and I haven't even seen, have you seen Patterson and some of the other stuff that he's done?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
I have. I loved it.
See, yeah.
It's so good.
Yeah, see, I need to do some more to get into some of those smaller films that he's in.
Adam Driver is like the perfect actor. He's doing these mainstream Star Wars films, and he's a known actor, and people now know his name, and he will be Kylo Ren for the rest of his life. But then he chooses in between to do Patterson. And it's a small film about a writer who's a poet who doesn't like to rhyme his words. That's pretty much it. And his relationship with his girlfriend and so forth and so on. And he drives a bus on Patterson Avenue, I think.
In Patterson, New Jersey.
I believe. Yeah. Yes, correct, which is a real place, which I did not know about until I saw that film. Anyway, the point is that that's a really smart choice to do in between Kylo Ren and a Spike Lee film. You do this small film because people are going to see it because of Adam Driver. I think I rented it because it's a Jim Jarmusch film, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's the reason why I rented it originally. And then I was like, oh, Kylo Ren, cool, I'm in. But I fell in love with Adam Driver in Girls. Yeah. So I've known about him since the very first episode of Girls, and he's fascinating in what he chooses and how he chooses what he makes as choices as an actor. So I think he should really be credited because he's doing small, minor films that are going to bring attention to it because he's Kylo Ren, and I think that's important.
Yeah, I think he's one of the rare people who seems like a non-actor. Like he seems like he doesn't... I think we've talked about them before, like people who have it type of a thing. I don't know. We might have even done I think we did a whole like episode on it or whatever. But yeah, Kyle Chandler's one of those people. I think there's multiple people we've talked about that, and he is one of those that it just doesn't seem like he's like you don't see the strings, I guess. So, but yeah, he's great in this, and we talked about Corey Hawkins, and then now I haven't seen the female lead in this, Laura Harrier. At least if I haven't been able to place her. So it looks like she was in Spider-Man: Homecoming.
Oh, she plays Michael Keaton's daughter. That's exactly who she is. I just put it together. I've been trying to put it together. Yep, that's who she is. Kind of Tom Holland's love interest in that film.
Yeah,
they
it
go to
is
prom
exactly
together.
that.
Yeah.
That is exactly who she is.
Yeah.
Wow,
yeah.
crazy.
Yeah,
she
she's
looks so
beautiful.
grown up in this movie though. Like, it's amazing how she can kind of like transition. I don't know what the years are, 2017 to. I don't know.
Well, she's playing a college-age student, so that makes.
I know, but I believed
like
her as a high schooler in that movie, and I totally believe her as a college student, and I would feel like there's a difference in how they would look, but that's crazy.
Stockard Channing played a high school student at the age of 30 in Greece, and we look back on it now and think she looks 30 playing a high school student, but
yeah,
she did, and she has the most amazing song in that movie. So I bought her as a high school student. I guess I'm easy when it comes to things like that. I guess I just don't think. I don't know. Yeah, she's beautiful. She's something to behold. She's very good in this too. She holds her own, and
she pushes back. She pushes back.
Yeah, she has to be strong. Yeah,
the main character against Ron. So, and she never really wavers as far as her views go. Even when he kind of confronts her about because she has an antagonistic view towards the police, not for a bad reason. I mean, because she's been antagonized by the police. So, she's not able to really see, and I think that's the discussion that they're trying to bring up, and that the Ron Stallworth character is wrestling with is, just because I'm a police officer doesn't mean I'm bad, and there's a kind of like a double, I don't know, a double standard. I don't know what you would call it, but where it's like, just because I'm a black person doesn't mean I'm I'm whatever, there's that double standard there, so there can be good police officers just as much as there can be bad police officers. So, but it's got to be hard to even, try to accept that when, if your only interactions with police have been negative ones.
Well, let me make a point about that, because that goes back to the point we were making about the rebel flag. If you know that as your history, then you are sympathetic to that rebel flag. And what your history is dictates who you become. And if her history has dictated that she's had bad interactions with police officers, it doesn't matter, black, white, or indifferent. She's not going to trust the police because she has a history telling her not to trust the police. And it's actually a very good instinct and a protective instinct that she has, because she even has a terrible interaction in the film
Yep.
with cops. Yes, people get their due in this film, and it does turn out more positive than negative, but it's scene after scene after scene in film history of white cops abusing African American females in the most disgusting ways. So even if she had a minute interaction with a cop, it taints you with who you are. It tans you, I guess is a better word to use, to where your history dictates how you treat people in the future, good, bad, or indifferent. So if your history is a rebel flag and that the Civil War was really won and that racism should be something, then that's what you're going to proceed onward with. Yes, you can fight your way out of those views and discover other ways and become a better person. Yes, you can. Just like she's going to have to start understanding a different way of life because she has interacted with this cop that she didn't even know was a cop for the longest time, and she's obviously attracted to him, and they become a couple. So she has to learn past her history, and I think that's one of the main motifs of this film.
Well, I think I'll comment on that later on in the movie. I don't know if that's necessarily straight up exactly what Spike Lee's saying, especially based on the end of the movie. But I think that there obviously needs to be discussions about this and about these things. But I thought it was interesting. There's a scene right in the middle, and it's just a small scene, and it's right in the middle of the movie. It's before any kind of the big traumatic thing happens. And it's just Ron Stallworth and his girlfriend Patrice, and they're walking up like an inclined, like a ramp next to a stream, and she brings up a W.E.B. Du Bois quote about double consciousness and being an American and a Negro, two consciousnesses living in the same dark body. I mean, I haven't read any W.E.B. Du Bois. I know he was a writer, an African-American writer, and I think there's things that I'm just not as experienced with. I just don't have the experience with that. And my experience as like the most boring, white dude, I've never really thought about that. And so a movie like this can help me to at least think about something like that, about how there can be kind of like this internal struggle. Just every day when you get up, there can be an internal struggle about being an American and an African American, and specifically an African American, how he says an American and a Negro. So that to me, I was just like, man, that's something that it makes me think from a different point of view, and that's good.
But that was part of my main point when I was first talking about this film, exposing yourself to something different that you might not even know is an issue. And when you get to tick off all the boxes that society says are normal, big, huge finger quotes around normal, white heterosexual male, who is going through the world in the Midwest and growing up, and, the world is, here's your silver platter. And the great thing about you is that you never took advantage of that. You probably didn't even know you could take advantage of that. I'm sure there have been advantages that you've had that other people might not, that you're not even aware of. Yeah. But you're willing to stop and say, hey, that small scene, which is shot beautifully, by the way, that is a great shot. He locks down that shot and he lets them walk up that ramp all the way down that river.
Single shot. Yeah.
And I love the juxtaposition of a wooden walkway through this natural, beautiful environment. And then man constructed this cement walkway to go through it. It's completely juxtaposed to what should be there. But, man does that. And I'm glad that they do that because it's a beautiful place to look at. And it's probably a beautiful place to walk. And then all of a sudden, it almost seems like a throwaway scene. And then she says that quote. And you're like, oh, okay, that's the point to all that. But to actually have an open mind enough as you as a person, meaning you, Josh, to hear that and to go, wow, I've never even had to contemplate anything like that. That's a huge thing. That's an important thing. Now, growing up different than what society is saying you should be or what society is accepting of, but blending in is also a whole nother phenomenon that is interesting to me because that's my life. But it still puts it in perspective that you can be both things that are in contradiction to each other because that's where you were born and that's who you were born to be or who you are. And so for somebody who is, big finger quotes again, privileged to have all the boxes ticked, to actually have your mind stop for a split second and say, wow, I never thought about that before. Mm-hmm. That probably is the best compliment to give to a film like this because it takes movies and art and books and theater and music and they can change people's minds and they can allow people to know there's something different than what they've always thought was. And it allows them to know things that they didn't even think about thinking about. So that to me is a credit to this film. So that's a good thing.
It is good. And the crazy part is, and I guess it's sad, but is that I probably wouldn't pick up a W.E.B. Du Bois book and read it from cover to cover, but I'm interested in the filmmaking of Spike Lee. I'm interested in this story. I'm interested in the storytelling, and within that, I'm confronted with this comment and with this snippet of writing and this quote. So that's something, and I think that's it. It shows how filmmaking can help to open people's eyes, or at the very least just show a different point of view. And I think that it's obviously Hollywood, I guess, probably still has a long way to go as far as like equality. I mean, we've seen that with female directors. I think there were less female directors this year than last year or something like that. The top 250 grossing movies or something. I read an article. It's like there's less female directors in that grouping than the other ones. But I think that hopefully we're getting to where more movies can come out showing different points of view, and that they're enough readily available that you should be able to see them. So I think that's great. 3 movie studios that are controlling all of the movies that everyone sees across the country or across the world. So that's great. All right, so we haven't talked about the Ku Klux Klan or any of the real characters or anything in there. Yeah, it's I thought it was funny how they were very, and I'm assuming this is historically accurate, but how they were very specific about not calling it the Ku Klux Klan. They called it either the organization at one point. I think David Duke calls it the Invisible Empire. It's all based on like staying secretive, and it could maybe there's shame in there. I don't know. Maybe that's just me trying to give their subconscious the benefit of the doubt, but but it's probably that it's funny that they don't want to kind of like bring the name. They don't want to actually like say the name, although they're not against, and they will just call black people horrible names at the drop of a hat. They don't want to say the Ku Klux Klan for some reason. I'm not sure. And the secret handshake thing, did you notice that?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah,
I did.
That's a thing too. That's a real thing.
Yeah, I've always heard that. That's there's something very frightening about that to me. There's something about physical contact that is meant to be between just two people that means something that can hurt a lot of people. It's really scary to me.
But it's in broad daylight. That's the scary part. It's in broad daylight. Two people can have that interaction silently, but around a bunch of other people. That's freaky to me. Like, oh. But yeah, I didn't know, but I looked it up, and like that's a thing. Like that's an actual thing. The handshake with the tapping or something. So, but yeah, that's crazy. We get a couple of different characters, different actors. We get to see the guy who playing Ivanhoe is the bodyguard in I, Tonya.
How'd you feel about him?
I mean, he's a caricature. I mean, his character is a caricature. He's just kind of like, dialed up to 11. But I mean, I don't know. I think probably did what he was asked to do. So I mean, I think that the more interesting interactions were between the so it's Paul Walter Hauser's who we're talking about. But the more interesting interactions were between the husband and wife, Jasper Pakonen.
It's got more vowels in it than my whole name. And how do you pronounce the A's with the double dots on top of them?
I don't know.
Like, forget about
Pakonen.
it.
And then
No,
his wife, played by Ashley Atkinson. So, I mean, some of those scenes are, I mean, it's funny that especially the scene when all the guys are kind of together and she brings in some food and she kind of like brings up here's an article and stuff. You can see that even within this group of people, she just wants to be accepted, but they won't accept her because she's a woman. And I think that that's just, I don't know. It's just like, it seems like this is the little boys club. You can't be in here. No girls allowed. Like, it's very kind of like, I don't know. It just seems, it seems very childish, I guess. But I guess technically they were in their little, club. And I don't know if, I guess women can't be, well, yeah, women can't be in the Ku Klux Klan. So they can be wives of people in the Ku Klux Klan.
What I found interesting about those two characters were when they were in bed together later on in the film, and they're having, like loving, cuddling couple time before they fall asleep, and they're talking about such hateful things. She starts it off with, do you ever feel bad? And he's like, why? So she's trying to understand that she's having feelings that obviously are juxtaposed to what is happening in real life. And she's trying to grapple with it, but then later on in the film, she goes full force into it. And I think that has a lot to do with her wanting to be accepted. And once she's given a task, then she's going to do it fully. Be careful of what you wish for. With every wish, there comes a thirst. And that is something that, we might not want to give away. It's a pretty big spoiler, but be careful what you wish, because you're going to get it, but it's not going to come to you the way that you thought. But I thought it was interesting that you see a loving couple who obviously love each other. He treats her very kind and sweet, basically when nobody's watching. Yeah. But with masculinity and all that stuff in play, and the boys' club, he has to hold up to some kind of standard or some kind of facade. But to actually see two people loving each other and spewing hate at the same time it's just crazy. It invokes so many interesting feelings because they genuinely are loving each other, talking about these hateful things. And it's just crazy. It's just complete contradiction in terms. And I think it says so much about what Spike Lee wants you to feel about this film without pressing it too hard. It's without knocking it over your head. And I think if they just sat around like they do later on in the film, when Birth of a Nation comes back up, if they just did that, we would not see them as fully formed human beings. So we can't even see a vulnerability. And then when you see them being vulnerable to each other while spewing hate, it just is so much more disturbing than it is them just spewing out that rhetoric that they spew out. It's just crazy great.
They're not caricatures. And so I think that's kind of my big issue with the Ivanhoe character, is he is more of a caricature. And but that couple is humanized, and it makes their choices, their views towards other people more heinous and scarier than somebody who just has one task. It's like, it's much easier to hate a caricature of someone than to hate a real person. So, so that was my big issue with that character.
I agree with you 100%. But here's the thing, because I was thinking about the Ivanhoe character driving to work or driving down the street or something. And I thought, well, Josh is probably going to have some issues with him being a caricature. And he's obviously a comic relief to a
Yeah.
degree. And he's obviously a caricature that's based in wanting to have a joke around his physical gestures and his tongue hanging out and all that other stuff. And he's exaggerating the characteristics of a real human being to make a point about this group of people are willing to have this person as a member, even though he's this. He says a couple of interesting things in the film about, that's the only thing he'll give them is that they can dance, that black people can dance. Other than that, he has no respect for anything that they can do. So he does have a little bit of a humanized moment. But here's the crazy thing. As I was thinking that, I'm driving towards 7-Eleven and I see this elderly gentleman coming out who's got the same body frame, the same kind of chunky face and double neck. And he's counting money and he stops at his car. I'm not kidding you. And throws back his head. His tongue comes protruding out. And as I'm getting out of the car, he goes and makes this guttural subvocal noise. And I was like, Ivanhoe. Like, that's Ivanhoe. Like, it was as exaggerated as the character in the film. Strangely enough, it was a black guy, which I thought was crazy funny on some level. But it also made me realize that people do these things in real life. People act like this in real life. They have these tics and they have these caricature moments. And that guy right there solidified me into believing that Ivanhoe was a really fully formed human being, because that guy looked, I mean, his tongue stuck out just like Ivanhoe did in the film. And I thought, good for you, Spike Lee. You exaggerated a character, but yet there's a real person. I wish I had a camera, or I wish I had pulled out my phone, because you wouldn't believe it. I mean, you literally wouldn't believe it. It was like that guy just in 2018 and black. It was crazy. And I'm talking about the exaggerated features and the tongue and the subvocal noises that this actor chose to make, not necessarily about their dispositions about this subject matter. But yeah, so I was like, I'm remembering this to bring it up at the podcast because Josh is never going to believe it.
Well, the leader of all those characters was David Duke, played by Topher Grace, who I haven't seen in a while, but I mean, he did a great job. I mean, he played that kind of like gee golliness, I think, especially over the phone. He let you enjoy those phone interactions, I think, as much as and played the kind of like in the know-it-all of that character, which actually is a real person. I mean, like, I don't know about these other, KKK members, but David Duke is definitely a real person and does come up later in the movie like the real guy does. So yeah, I mean, I think that's, taking taking a shot at him is definitely warranted, and having that kind of like, we'll get to spoilers here in a second, but there's definitely a good payoff with that character. So
I just wanted to say I looked up Topher Grace, his bio, and he's been working nonstop. He has an IMDb credit all the way from Spider-Man, which is really the last thing that I mean, I've seen him, but he's been working nonstop. He's got 2 or 3 credits every year since 2007, so he's definitely been working. I just, this is a huge film and it's getting a lot of critical acclaim, and it's, going to be nominated for Oscars, and he's playing a prominent part. Here's the thing I'll say about his performance as David Duke. The subtlety to the kind of calming kindergarten teacher-esque thing that he does is so unnerving when you see David Duke at the end of the film. And he has that quality where he's like, okay, once upon a time, there were the 3 bears, and you think he's going to tell this like really cute little story, and then it ends up being this massively racist thing, obviously because he's David Duke. But I think it was smart to cast somebody like Topher Grace, because he has such an everyman quality about him, and he has such a kind of quiet quality about him, and he he never raises his voice. He doesn't have any kind of really over the top moments. One moment when he takes the picture,
Mm-hmm.
there's that moment, and he kind of loses his mind at that point. But just the kind of soothingness in his voice, and how much that must have attracted so many people and convinced so many people to do so many bad things, that it goes back to that word of the podcast, juxtaposed. It's completely juxtaposed to how you would think somebody would spew that kind of rhetoric. If it's hate speech, you would think that they would have hate disposition about them, but he doesn't. And he pulls it off hook, line, and sinker, to the point where when you're listening to it, it starts to kind of make sense what he's saying because of the tone and the cadence to the rhythm of his voice. And you're like, wait, no, that's terrible what he just said. But
Yeah.
he handles it so well. And it's unnerving to say and do things that are, once again, juxtaposed to who you are as a person, as an actor. It's a challenge, but it is really devastating to have to recreate stuff like that, and to be professional, and to do the line readings the way that they're written, regardless of your personal views about your character. You have to somehow find a vulnerability and a sympathetic bone in that character, and I think he pulls it off. He actually, in the 5 or 6 scenes, he's in quite a few more than that though, he does form a character that becomes more than just what we have in our head as David Duke. And then you see the real David Duke at the end of the film, and you're like, damn, he's a bad man.
Mm.
That's what my nephew would say. He's a bad
Mm.
man. He's a bad guy. There's good guys and bad guys. That guy's a bad guy. But he does it in such a soothing way that it's really intriguing and not hard to understand why people bought into that.
Mm-hmm.
If this is the history and this is what they've been brought up to believe, and then somebody talks to you that way, of course you're going to buy into it. At least those people would. So it's an important performance, and I think he did his job really well.
All right. You were talking about kind of juxtapositions, and then there is this scene kind of like, I guess, a little more halfway through the movie where you have the juxtaposition of I think he's supposed to be, he's a speaker. The character is a speaker, and he's supposed to be an activist, but he's played by Harry Belafonte, who is an activist and an actor and singer and performer, all these things. So he's playing Jerome Turner. So, but that's juxtaposed with the scene of the, I don't know, it's like a baptism or something. I don't know. It's like the KKK members becoming members, or I don't know, getting some sort of a special ceremony thing happening to them, and then they watch Birth of a Nation, and then the Jerome Turner character played by Harry Belafonte brings up Birth of a Nation, and then brings up this harrowing story of a kid that gets accused of raping a girl, I guess, a young girl, and then gets tried by an all-white jury, and then brought out and mutilated, and then killed, like just lynched essentially, but in such a horrible way, like burned alive. It's just horrible. And that's juxtaposed with the Birth of a Nation, and you see the people, the KKK people watching Birth of a Nation, plus the storytelling. And then I guess you even see the actual pictures. I'm assuming they're the actual pictures of that event, on screen. And so you kind of see how, well, like we talked about earlier, I guess how media can influence people, and can, like what you said, tell them what they're supposed to feel, or give them a direction for their feelings or emotions. So that's just crazy. And the scary part is that movie is, from like a cinema grammar standpoint, has a lot of things in it that movies before that didn't have. There weren't many movies before that, but there were like editing things that D.W. Griffith did in there that had never been done before. There was all kinds of things that people even use today that were done in that movie. But, because of the subject matter of that movie, it's got a, conflicting place in the history of cinema.
Well, let me just say this. I love the fact that he went back and forth between the two. I think obviously the word is juxtaposed. But the thing that struck me was, I don't think I'll ever be desensitized to this subject matter, lynchings, civil rights, any of the above. It's hard to be desensitized to something that's not that far back in our history. But every once in a while, somebody makes a point about it that just makes it fresh and raw again, to the point where you have all the emotions that you feel when you first heard about things like that. And when they talk about making or postcards and stamps out of the pictures of this lynching, it just devastated me again on a level that I guess I should realize I'm going to have that kind of feeling about those situations. But it brought something back up in me that's always there. But the thought that that's what people did, that people actually lynch people, is just beyond my comprehension as a human being. But to actually make it a public event where they allowed the children to get out of school early to see it is, I don't even know the word for it. Mind-boggling, mind-blowing. It's incomprehensible that that happened. And it became this spectacle. But then when you see it juxtaposed to the KKK watching Birth of a Nation and how they get all kind of crazy, over the top, roused up and start, shouting back at the film and start, saluting the film, which is kind of the last image of that film being watched. But to actually see how people can get so hyper over their belief that they could actually go out and do those things it needs to be repeated until human existence doesn't exist anymore, because it is devastating. And there was a point where I thought he was becoming a little bit over the top with the watching of the Birth of a Nation. But I thought, how else do you get a crowd of people who burn a human being after lynching him and dragging him through the town square? And then how else do you get a group of people to allow their children to get out of school to watch it? How else do you get a group of people to make it a postcard and to make it stamps and to make posters out of it? How else do you do that if you don't show how a crowd mentality can take over a human heart? And so the more exaggerated the KKK membership meeting got, the more I understood how devastating the other side must have been, because it's out of control. You cannot fight that mob mentality, especially if you're one person. You cannot fight that history. You cannot stop that from happening. You just can't do it. And watching films like this allow us to start understanding that we can't get to that place again. We can never go back to that place again. And yes, I know I'm on a soapbox and I know I'm, a white guy preaching, but that's what I felt when I was watching the movie. I thought, this is why this can happen. Because look at how these people are acting watching a black and white film that's decades old to them. This is how people can get. This is why things like that can happen. And it's really masterfully done.
Yeah, well, and in the same way that that those people were watching a 1912 movie, something that came out 50 years before. I mean, that's essentially, you could make an argument that Gone with the Wind would be a similar thing. And I know there's certain places that refuse to play. A lot of places refuse to play Birth of a Nation. I don't even know if you can readily get it on YouTube or whatever. I don't really know what the availability is of Birth of a Nation. But I think that, that's the other thing, is that knowing the history of that film and at least Spike Lee kind of showing the viewers the history of that film and showing portions of that film within his film, he's kind of kind of informing you as to fellow black people, this is how we were portrayed in film. And this is what all the people around the country were seeing. So in that way, you know, the that could, and you know, he even brings it up, Harry Belafonte even brings up that specific point. You know, that could be how, you know, the people got to that point where they were just so vicious. I'm not saying that you can hang all racism on, you know, Birth of a Nation, or, you know, any film or all film, but that's a tool that can be used. So I think that, you know, hopefully, you know, Spike Lee can use his film as a tool also to you know, help to counteract that.
Well, let's go to the fact that the President of the United States showed it in the White House. But there's yet another motif that keeps reoccurring, that he makes it a point that the President of the United States showed that in the White House. And that connects the threat at the beginning to the threat at the end.
So let's talk about...
Did I say thread or threat?
Let's talk about
Sorry,
spoilers from now on. So we kind of get the whole explosion and all that. And I think that the big thing, like as far as the movie's concerned, we get the, you know, the threat of danger towards our main characters. We get that to be, you know, kind of like, it actually turns out to be kind of like like you said, be careful what you wish for. And the crazy part is, among all that, we're excited that Patrice isn't killed, but then we get thrown directly back into real life, which is he's an undercover black cop who can't get to his badge, therefore he is now arrested. So, and the only reason why he was not arrested and taken into custody in that, and the wife was able to, the only reason why she wasn't able to go free was because of his white partner coming in to, you know, to pretty much like vouch for him. There was no, you know, assumption of honesty on the part of those other officers. So we get thrown very quickly back into, we get the joy of seeing the other characters, you know, get blown up, the KKK members get blown up, but then we get thrown right back into reality and we get to see what he's having to deal with. And then we go back to the joy of catching the skeezy, crazy racist cop played by Frederick Wellery. And so we get to see him get caught and everybody's happy. And Ron comes in, gets to tell off David Duke. I mean, it's all great until, you know, we kind of get thrown back into it at the end of the movie. And now you can talk about your scene. Unless you want to talk about kind of, at least for me, like the end was kind of like, hey, everything's great. Like we were expecting like everybody jumps in the air with their hand up, and then the freeze frame happens, and then, you know, we cut to credits, but we don't get that. We kind of get like a little bit of that, and then it slams you back in, and then we get a little bit of fun stuff, and then it slams you back in. You know, it's like, hey, this is awesome. It all worked out really well. Oh, you have no funding, and you can never deal with the KKK ever again. You know, and it goes back and forth. And hey, let's call up David Duke and tell him that I'm a black guy who's been talking to him. You know, it's just like it keeps going back and forth and back and forth, and it never really gives you like the quote unquote satisfying Hollywood ending, which is, I think, is proper.
I got my hands in the air. I'm looking for stuff like that. I think the word has been overused in the podcast, but it is the word of the podcast, juxtapose. Because when that sequence happens and the bomb goes off, it's exciting because there's a lot of things happening at one time. And as an audience member, what's interesting is Spike Lee never allows you to be in front of or behind what he's telling you. You're right with it the whole entire time. And sometimes as an audience member, you're a little bit behind because the director wants you to be. And then sometimes you're ahead of it. Don't go into that room. Don't go around that corner because you already know there's some form of something evil in that Annabelle film, right? So you're ahead of the characters in the film. You're right along with it. Like, you don't know what's happening until it starts to happen. You don't know that she's going to plant the bomb in the car or by the car or underneath the hub or the tire until she can't put it into the mailbox. You don't know any of that stuff is happening until you're in real time. And then when that all happens, you're right. There's not a satisfaction, but you're like, well, be careful, dude, because like you're a bad person who tries to blow somebody up, and you blew somebody up you didn't want to blow up. So be careful what you wish for, because look what you did to yourself. And then you're back into that scene where he's trying to arrest her, and then she starts screaming all the things that she starts screaming, and then the cops show up, and you're like, wait, what's happening? And you're right. Then you get to the Pepsi commercial moment where you're going to high five everybody, and it's going to freeze frame on everybody jumping in the air. But that's not what happens. It ends with this incredibly cool Spike Lee shot where, well, it doesn't end with that, but the last shot of that story is the two main characters, Patrice, and, oh my God, I just forgot his name. Ron. Is it Ron? Yeah. Yeah. Are sitting in their apartment, and there's somebody knocks on their door, and they both pull out guns, and they do that fantastic Spike Lee thing where they're on some form of moving platform, and they're moving towards, as the camera's moving.
They're on the camera dolly.
Yeah, that's right. And they look like they're floating through the hallway. And he does that in almost every one of his films. And I think it's in, it might be Jungle Fever. I can't remember. It's his character that it happens to. I think it's Jungle Fever where he's a huffer. God, I can't remember what movie it's in. But anyway, he turns those characters upside down on that dolly shot and makes them float through the air upside down because they're drug addicts, and that's his way of showing, the difference to where just normal people are floating through the space. And they come down the hallway, and it looks like one of those old 70s Pam Grier films. So you're like, wow. And I literally was like applauding. Yes, I needed this. And there's sort of a hamminess to it, and there's sort of a jovial feeling about it, but the situation they're involved in keeps you grounded and serious. And then it goes to that shot of them looking out the window, and it's, instantaneously that it's a burning cross, even though it's, less than a half of inch big, it's a burning cross. And then they show the KKK members doing that kind of ritual where they're kneeling and then bending and all this crazy crap that they do around a burning cross. And I'm thinking to myself, this is how you spend your Friday night. What? You've learned a dance in front of a burning cross. What are you doing as human beings? Based on everything that we've talked about, you kind of understand it to a degree, but that's shot of them coming down the hallway was exhilarating for me because I needed it. I needed that Spike Lee moment, and it's utilized so well, and he does it so well, and he does it for this narrative. For this movie, this is how this shot will be done, and it's fantastic.
So I'm going to bring it back really quick before that exact, moment when they go out on the dolly and they're dollying down the hallway. They're talking. She said, "Did you hand in your resignation to the KKK?" And he's like, "Yes." And she said, "Did you hand in your resignation to the Colorado Springs Police Department?" And he said, "No." And she said, "I can't be with that." She said, "I can't be with the thing that I feel like is my enemy." And he's trying to kind of like, talk to her about it and get her to kind of, understand his point of view. And she never acquiesces. Like, she never says, okay. So there is a chance, instead of this being like this is her, changing her point of view. I think this is maybe an example of like, we have these two people. We have the person who's fighting within the system and the person who's fighting outside of the system, fighting the system from the outside. We have both of them next to each other, fighting for the same goals, fighting against the same thing. So I think that's still a powerful message.
Absolutely. And the fact that she doesn't make that decision, or you don't know what the decision is or where they're going to be, it's like a good book.
Yeah.
You don't know what happens after the book ends, but you have an imagination that if the characters are so well drawn like they are in this film, that you kind of play it out for the rest of your life how that movie did end. And I will point out, she said she wouldn't be with a cop, and then she ends up with him anyway after she finds out that he's a cop.
Yeah.
because they're living together, or they're at least in the
Hanging out
same
together.
environment
Yeah.
together. Yep. And they seem romantically involved in that scene in the restaurant where they set up the cop. And they don't seem romantically interested in each other just because they're setting up the cop. They're still romantically interested in each other after. And she's in a cop bar.
Hmm.
So I think it's one of those brilliant moments and choices that Spike Lee makes to allow the audience to fill in the blanks themselves instead of spoon feeding you
Yeah.
what you should know. So, me personally, I need to think about it some more. I'm not saying that she changes her mind and stays with a cop, but I'm wondering if he stays a cop. I don't know his true story after this, and I've been
Hmm.
looking up stuff about the real story. I don't know. I have no idea if they were even a couple in real life, or this is just the ingenue and the leading man, the leading lady, and the leading man in this film, and he wanted them to be a couple for structural purpose for the narratives. I don't even know if she really existed, but it's left up to the interpretation of the audience, and that to me is always a plus versus telling us exactly what you want us to know.
Yeah.
Unless the story is so real that the them being together at the end of the film is an important part. But here's the thing. They end up together floating down the hallway together,
Yeah.
fighting against the same thing together. So one might interject that they end up together. But I am also a happily ever after kind of guy. So I'm
Okay.
hoping they do, because they're really good looking people, and that good looking of people deserve each other because they're really pretty. But that, and they're interesting characters, and they can learn so much from each other.
Yeah.
So
That's true.
I don't know yet. Give me a month. I'll think about it.
And we go from that, the cross burning to the overlays and the chants of the Charlottesville protests, and then that's when this movie just kind of like, I mean, that's when it gets really it gets real. So to kind of say that, like, this is a period piece, so like you thought we would have had all this stuff figured out in the last 40 years, but or 50, yeah, 50 years almost, but we haven't gotten it figured out. And and here and here we are. It was like, about a year before this movie came out was when the Charlottesville protests happened. And you get all the clips that you've probably seen on in the news, some of those pictures. And I don't know, there's not much to say about it other than, after seeing a movie like this, seeing where we are now, you get, at least for me, I felt some sadness that we haven't progressed as much as we probably should have, as a society, and trying to understand and and appreciate the people who are, on the front lines of that, something like that, the people who actually went out there and did try to fight uh against the hate that was being shown by the KKK. Now, I think that whole situation was, just in reading about it, like, the situation was handled horribly. I mean, there's ways to maneuver people around and allow protests of anything, but it seemed like there was like some sort of a powder keg that was created, and it just was allowed to happen by the police. Imagine that. But it was allowed to happen by the Charlottesville police, and that is, bad for all sides, I think. But still, I don't know. I mean, we get to see David Duke, saying the crap that he says, and David Duke even name checks Trump and some of the things that he said, and then we get some clips of Trump. We get all of these things, and then at the very end, you see the flag upside down, the American flag upside down. And I did look that up, and like, that is, I mean, that's a real thing. The flag being upside down, it's it's a sign of dire distress in instances of extreme danger to life or property. So that's, I mean, a technical definition of what the representation of an upside down any upside down national flag, but specifically in this case, the upside down American flag. So, I mean, you could say that that case has definitely been made by Spike Lee in this movie. And it is very, it's a very codified graphical representation of what he's been trying to say the whole movie, and about how our country was in distress back then, and it's in distress now.
Well, I'm going to go from your last point and just make a couple of points because I think you said that very well, and I agree with everything that you say. Does not the upside down flag turn black and white?
It does.
It goes from color. Yeah, I think that
to kind of see the separation between black and white. Wow.
Yeah, the end of the film affected me deeply, obviously, for all of those reasons that you talked about. But I also think that showing all of that realism that's just happened to us, it also allowed a cathartic moment for me to release the tension from the film that I just saw. And I had an emotional reaction, and that's not unusual for me. And I wept out loud at the image of the young lady who lost her life in Charlottesville. But I was actually weeping going into that sequence, knowing what was coming, and I knew it was coming. And here's the thing I'll say. You said that, we're coming from one place and we really haven't moved into another place yet, and that's what Charlottesville is showing based on what the film showed, and now we're 40 years in the future, and we're still in that same position, 50 years in the future, and we're still in the same position. What I would say to that is that a percentage of us are still in that position. Those men who chanted what they chanted in Charlottesville are a percentage of America, not a large percentage. But I think you're absolutely right. Spike Lee's point, from what I took from it, is that we haven't progressed far enough past it that people are not still losing their life over this subject. Mm-hmm. And it's a devastating thing. And whether or not you agree with the president and how he approached that subject, when you see it at the end of a film like this, it really hits home, and it allows you to see it in a different way after seeing this movie. You really understand how people can buy into something like this, because you have the president of the United States not finding the words to comfort us, but finding the words and to try to justify it, to try to make it make sense on both sides, because those are the words that he uses. Yeah. And when you see this movie that Spike Lee has presented to you for 2 hours, and then you see that, and then you see that style I was talking about, David Duke talks like
he's
as
charismatic,
Topher Grace. And he does it in this kind of, sheep or wolf in sheep clothing, where he just is very soothing and very matter of fact. And you can kind of start to understand how people are buying into it. But it saddens me because people lose their life. But it also saddens me that human beings can't spend their life doing something other than spewing hate.
Yeah.
I can't put it in my mind's eye. But Spike Lee is a genius because he does that in a lot of his films. He will show you a film about a particular narrative and then show you something about the realism that happens. The way he ends Jungle Fever, I don't know if you've seen Jungle Fever.
No, I haven't.
But, it's so good. Samuel Jackson is a crackhead. So is Halle Berry, by the way. And it's an enormously important performance for Halle Berry because it's a small one, but it's something she's never done before or since. And the film ends with a moment with her and Wesley Snipes that really has nothing to do with the main two characters of that film. It has to do with this epidemic of crack on our streets. And he has a way of pulling no punches at the end of his film. And I think that's important. So, it's important. I think this film is important, and I think all of the accolades that he's been nominated for and everything, all of the publicity that this film has gotten, and it's caused a lot of controversy, but that's not unusual for Spike Lee and his films. And Boots Riley has come out and said a few things, and there's some realistic things that Ron Stallworth has said kind of didn't happen. By the way, I was looking up Patrice is not a real character. She was made up for the film.
Yeah, from what I've read, it's not that wasn't an actual person in the movie, but it makes sense as to like, you have to have a narrative, you have to have stakes, you have to have something for him to, you have to have something for him to hone in on as a character, and something for him to specifically protect. I get it as a device. I mean, it makes sense. I don't really fault the movie for that.
No, I just love her as a character. So I was like, oh, is she a real person walking around? The world's a better place with her in it. And there are people who are like her in
Sure.
this world, so I'm comforted by that. But her in particular, I would like for her to be walking around.
Yeah, that'd be cool. All right. Well, and I also do hope that this, I hope that more people see it. I haven't seen all of Spike Lee's movies, but the subject matter of this movie, the style of the movie, the kind of like, realer than life. This thing is so crazy that it actually, you couldn't even come up with it. It's so crazy that got me into the theater, and I'm glad that I saw it. And I hope that other people, were able to experience it, and maybe the Oscar buzz. I mean, I'm assuming the Oscar buzz will get more people to, to see this, and will bring these up. I didn't know he hadn't ever been nominated for an Academy Award. Spike Lee has never.
Screenplay.
Oh, for
Only screenplay for
Do the Right Thing. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Only screenplay.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well, you can check us out on the web at actorandengineer.com. You can go to facebook.com/actorandengineer, and you can tweet us at actorengineer. We'll see you next time.